exhibition, for those of you who haven't heard much about this show, is a group of work, 19 other potters who Jeff is close to and who he invited to submit work. And Leach is the strand that links them all together in some form or another.
So I'd like Jeff to start off by just expanding on the notion of what passing it on means to you, so people understand more about how this show came together.
I curated a show here in, I think it was 2007, of Midwestern potters. And after the series Crossroads was filmed, I was thinking it was time to again honor Leach, because he's been forgotten. And potters here, they die and they're forgotten in just a heartbeat. So I thought it's about time to honor Bernard. And I read a quote by Clary that said, this is during the filming, she said, "Oh, I wish we could just abolish that word, the past. We're talking about the past. It's all about a continuum." So I think of this as a continuum. And so I was trying to think of a theme, and I thought, oh, it's about the people who've worked in my studio. And the people who have worked in my studio, they weren't students or friends, they were just friends that knocked at the door or wanted to work with me, or people I met around the world and invited them, let's just work together. But there's always been some Leach connection, either direct or obtuse, or knew a friend, or read this book in college. We're all roughly the same age, in our 60s, and this was the Bible back in the 60s, the Potter's book.
Could I step in?
Sure.
What I'd like to do, how many of you have heard of Bernard Leach? I know there's some clay people here, so all of you, even some people under 60. And I mean, I think one thing, I'm a retired professor of ceramics, and one of the things that I have apprehended in the last 10, 12 years is how exactly when people get old and then they croak, they are forgotten. And I'll just tell one story about that, is from Doug Casebeer, who's the director, he's the artistic director at Anderson Ranch and the head of ceramics. And he had a couple of people come in, young people who had MFAs in ceramics, and there was a huge Volco stack sitting right there in the studio, and they pointed to this stack, and they said, "Who's that?" And he said, "This is, a Peter Volco stack. You know who that is, don't you?" And they said, "No." And they had graduate degrees in our field, and they didn't know, because it's always about what's coming up. And especially now with contemporary pop culture and Facebook and Etsy and Instagram, it's even more so about the here and now and what's hot right this minute. Who's ahead of me 5 years that's really doing well? That's who I want to emulate. So Bernard Leach, the magic of Leach to me, and I think my role here is more as this teacher type, is that he was influenced by John Ruskin and William Morris and the arts and crafts movement. So although some of us are more attached to Leach, like certainly Jeff, having been an apprentice, and we have work back there of Clary Illian, who was an apprentice, others like me learned about Leach through people like Jeff later in life when I was really hungry for that. But it goes back to William Morris, and William Morris was resisting the industrialization of the Industrial Revolution in England and everything being machine made, and he extolled, using Gothic art as the benchmark, he extolled the handmade. And so that is one of the things that unifies all of us Leach descended potters, is extolling the handmade. And I know that in my life it's making pots, playing the piano, knitting, and cooking. Everything I do is handwork, same with Jeff. And then I would just drive home one other thing about Leach that sets Leach apart, the Hamada Leach tradition, from some other things that happen in the clay world or things that might be coming up in the contemporary American pottery movement, and that is we're all obsessed with form. So it's form first, and even though I'm exceedingly decorative, the form is first. And even if it's a plate with a form. So that's one way to start separating the Leach descended potters and from some other kind of things that are happening in pottery in America.
Another aspect too, I wanted to just talk about how about what Leach did was with his pottery, there are many students that came from around the world, and he traveled and he pulled people together. And it's odd that I live on my own out in the country, way off in the boonies, and how I love connecting people. And Gail was the last person in my studio. My studio is now a private studio. It's just mine now. But how I connect people now is, so I started playing the piano again, and I have a circle of pianists. And then that's how I collect and create communities in my life, because I don't have a biological family. That's how I connect and create these families.
So talk more about this passing it on idea beyond this exhibition. What do we need to do?
When I was thinking of passing it on, I began to think about it in the most broadest sense of all of the people that are involved with this whole idea of passing it on. And we have some obvious people here, but I began to think about how, for instance, Tim Heil, whose work, he is a truck broker by day, at night he's a wood turner. And he turns wood at night. He's passionate about the handmade objects. You go into his home and there's a handmade canoe hanging from the ceiling, and handmade paddles he's made, and chairs he's made, and rolling pins and things down there that he's made. And he has bought hundreds and hundreds of my pots, and now he gives them away to people in mass. He just passes it on through his giving and his generosity. He was going to be here tonight, but he could not make it. But that's another way how it's passed on through people, in his case, buying, loving, and his mother eats off handmade pots. Tim and his family, handmade pots. Tim's kids have grown up, they come and buy handmade pots, and now their children are eating handmade. So it's 4 generations off of handmade pots. That's one way it's being passed on.
Mm-hmm. Like, I have a young daughter. She's just going to be graduating from college, and when she set out to have her first living space, she just said, I want to take all pots from here for us to eat off. I said, well, you have other roommates, maybe you better. She said, I told them all already. And she's carried through with that, and she hauls around a Jeff Oestreich compound vase everywhere she goes, and it really values it. The thing is that there are challenges, and I see in our field, to me, there is one challenge that is insurmountable, and it's this, that I like to imagine this ancestor of mine living in Wiltshire, England, or it would be a guy, of course, because he was a potter in my imagination, so it was a male, or Luxembourg, and he was a village potter, and 200 years ago, and even through the dawn of the 20th century, villages around the world, and now it's only in the third world, and it's declining there, had potters that created everything from troughs for animals to drink out of, for cooking utensils. In my slide lecture, I show all these pots from Africa that are braziers or grills or cooking pots or steaming ovens. They were essential members of their community. And now we are more aligned with the art world in that we make objects that are valued more aesthetically than being these essential members of our community. And I have to believe that there is a psychological undercurrent to that for those of us in this field that runs through it, even if we think about it or not. And then the second challenge that I think we all have to deal with as potters who tremendously are passionate and caring about what it is we do and believe it's important for humans to experience the handmade pot, is that we have to promote so that it doesn't get forgotten. Because I look at my daughter's generation, and unless they bump into things on Facebook or somewhere online or some way that way, they don't bump into it. It's not like they're going off to college and being introduced to a similar set of ideas like my generation was when we went to college. So, I mean, I view these as challenges that the passing it on has to become a grassroots movement from all of you and all of us that care about the art of the handmade, because it's really being reduced to kind of zilch in a certain way, I feel.
It's mentioning how me being trained in clay in the middle to late 60s, how the movement was pretty young then. We all hauled our wheels to art fairs, we demonstrated. And before that, Warren McKenzie would talk a department store to let him put his wheel in the window. And people would walk by, what is he doing? And so he did his part, and we did our part by educating people that came through. And I realized after the experience at the Archie Bray, the students didn't know of Leach, Hamada, Lucy Reed, Volkos, that, I assumed that the work we did back then would extend beyond, we wouldn't have to do that. But I think it's more critical now that we we have to keep educating, and that role of us, aside from making, is critical.
I think there's one movement that I'm seeing, and one of my former students is really one of the leaders of it, Michael Strand, is this sort of using craft work as social consciousness raising. And he's doing amazing projects all over the world now. Like a typical one is, Jeff talked just earlier about how everybody has some pot. He said handmade, but not necessarily. We all have some cup in our cupboard that we hate, but we keep it for some reason. Maybe somebody gave it to us. It might be a Taiwanese blanket, could be anything. Somebody gave it to us, and for some reason it's there, or it's got some connection, and we would love not to have to own it. So one of Michael's projects is people know in advance that the first 100 people, there's going to be little houses with tea bowls sitting in them that he made by hand, and they can bring and switch out their cup that they loathe and take one of his tea bowls.
Right.
But only if they leave a story as to why they were burdened with this object and why they want to get rid of it. So that's one of his projects. Another one of his projects is he boxed up beautiful bowls in handmade wooden boxes and sent them off to different fire departments in the city of Portland. And then each one of these fire departments were invited to make food and serve them in these bowls. And he didn't know at the time how competitive the cooks were in these fire departments, and that's ended up being a huge big thing. Now that is transmitting notions about the value of the handmade in very different ways than anything that's happened before. And it can happen because of social media, because he can then document everything, get it all on Facebook and online, etc. So I mean, that's one way. It's a very different way because it's proselytizing about community more than it's proselytizing about the value of a handmade pot in a certain way, I think. But it's interesting.
The one thing that worries me now is you go into Crate and Barrel and they got the stickers handmade. Everything's sticker with handmade. That means something now, but I think we're being confused with what a real handmade thing is versus what you may see at Crate and Barrel or something. And I commented this morning too how you go to the grocery store, everything's got this natural sticker on. What does natural mean? I'm so tired of that natural sticker. It means nothing.
It means not much.
It meant something 20 years ago. But for me, the wheel, and I'm a closet knitter. I started knitting 5 years ago.
But he doesn't do enough of it.
Closet anymore.
I forgot my knitting at home. I couldn't find my fifth sweater. I do scarves, and I couldn't find I've got to finish one before I die. But we started. But anyway, I began to think about, as you were talking about how the Northern Clay Center now goes into nursing homes with clay and what it's doing in terms of helping people with memory issues and stuff. And then the extreme with that is, and I just think whatever we can do to just carry this message, whatever. The other extreme is I was teaching a class in a prison in Australia, and this prison, you can earn a degree in ceramics, you can earn a degree in culinary arts, you can earn a degree in what's a third or fourth one, but there's a full studio there. They had to count the tools at the end of the day, but how even that extreme of it, how people fall into clay and how they then is up for grabs.
She has a question. Oh, I was just going to say I've been thinking a lot about conscious living. For some reason, those two words have been coming to me quite a bit. And I think what you might be saying, and what I think we're afraid to say, is that this is a moral issue. That living with things that are made with care and love is where our culture has gotten away from. And so getting back to what you're talking about, gathering as friends and living with things that are considered and careful, is where our culture needs to go. And I think that there's a hunger for that return. So I think people know it when they feel it. They just need to be exposed to it.
Yeah, I might tweak your word and say it's a health issue. It's a holistic issue. That,
Right.
and I think we happen to live in a culture that is more like the Romans than the Greeks. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're part of the technological driven militaristic culture where art is not as important. I recently found out that when Rome was just beginning to have the Roman Republic, It had no theaters at all, but Greece had theaters for 500, 1,000 years already by then. So I mean, the Greeks were into the art. They realized that art was a holistic value that every culture needed to be healthy. And I think that's what you mean, is that we need to be healthy.
Yeah.
And I believe we are healthier because even though the mainstream culture may not accept or realize or think about it, the fact is a lot of art is produced. And it does help. It is a healing agent for any culture. It's necessary.
I would say more perhaps because we're so poisoned to the side of consumerism and so out of touch with what's more important than maybe it is. It's ethical to go back the other direction. But
we could all join the Church of Stop Shopping. I heard about that church on a great documentary called The Perfect Cappuccino. What Clayton Bailey's description, his response to that question at an NCECA conference in 1973 was, it's science. And I mean, that is a debate that I personally can't engage in. And I see others nodding their heads in here.
That debate, that whole debate, art and craft, goes back to the Renaissance times.
Well,
why
you know
we
why?
keep dragging this up?
Yeah, but I don't think it would never come to anybody's, like our grad students always wanted to be talking about that. It would never have entered their mind had the price point been reversed.
And I love what Jim Bassler said. Jim is a weaver, and he said craft is building an idea. And I think the building is essential to the craft. The making, the actual production with your own body, forming something is essential to me, to the craft.
And I think also that at the core, in any art form, in any artistic endeavor, at the source, and I could pick out a vessel here and just use it, there is a mystery at the source of the most profound artworks that is indescribable. And part of why we're drawn to it is we can't suss it out. You know, we have to keep coming back. I know that I have some artwork in my living room that feeds me every day, because it always is asking me questions and I never can fully answer them. And I love this quote of Herbert Reed. He is an ancient early 20th century, mid 20th century art critic. And he said, and he wrote books, he was kind of into connoisseurship, and he wrote books about all the different media. So there's one on painting, and he said that pottery is at once the most simple and the most abstract of all art forms. And that really unfolds that notion of mystery, but we can't really just break it down and turn it into an engineering discussion. It's, you know, it is that thing that propels us. And one of the things with people like Sam Maloof or anybody, any of us, is it's not something we're choosing, it's something we're compelled to do. And that is a big difference that separates a vocation from an avocation. Right there, compelled to do it.
And I was watching on public TV last week a program about Hampton Court, and it was built in the 1550s.
Henry VIII.
Yeah. And they had to do, it was endless restoration. It's an old building, and they had to replace some bricks, so they had to find the clay pit where the bricks came from. And they had a man that was hand making in the molds the brick and hand firing it, just going back to these methods. And the program talked about how when you're a craftsperson, you give your life over to this material. You just give it over without question.
But I think that there's another way. I think that what keeps me always going in the studio, what keeps artists are very neurotic people. And it's our neurosis that if nothing is ever good enough, we have to go back and try to do it better. And we're not contented people. Contented people don't need to keep engaging in things at this level. So it really is it's this restless thing of I gotta make it better. You know, and that's where, don't you think that's where?
And that's why, for instance, I unstacked the kiln at noon yesterday to get the hot pots on the plane just in time to get to the airport, because I thought, I want to make a couple more, I can make them better. It's got to be better. I just want another hour to make, and then I'll blow them up in the oven or something. And I remember Pat Burns, whose work is down this way, she was talking to her mother about, oh, I just unstacked the kiln, I have to race off this. And her mother said, well, why didn't you stack the kiln fired earlier? And Pat couldn't why you can't just explain to her why you can't, because her mother was not
I
a
brought
potter.
one piece warm from the kiln.
There's
You know,
something
and I can
that's
see how I
heroic
can
and-
make it a little better. And maybe it is the nature of life that for a while, Bernard Leach and his influence is going to go into wane. And then the pendulum swings, and soon all of these younger potters that are slip casting and taking all their influences from small industrial production, the pendulum will swing back to wanting the touch of the hand and thinking about the magic of volumetric forms. I do believe that there is a lot of opportunity to do handwork, and that people working on keyboards all day yearn to. My husband works on a keyboard all day, and he comes home and cooks. And I think there is this human need to use these as tools. So I don't worry. I feel like the education thing will fall out and happen, and that people like Jeff and me and others, we need to keep Leach's name alive, and hope that someday there is a return to what he offered in a certain way, at least to me, to the thing of the value of handwork, and in pottery making the value of volumetric forms that are, he had this whole thing about the ethical pot. What's your take on the ethical pot, Jeff? No, but I said this to Clary, what's your take on the ethical pot? And she said, I'm there. And she really put on, I don't know if you know Clary Illian's pots, they're down over there. She went to the Leach Pottery like a decade before Jeff did. And she took it on like a religion, literally, like she's there. And she does believe in this notion of an ethical pot, which I can't quite suss out what that means. Do you have any clue?
I don't.
Anybody else? Weigh in. So he really was an ideologue. He really had a dogma that went with his things. It's because of that dogma that he turned out so many influential people, because he narrowed the parameters like this. And so these people focused.
Day one, got on the wheel, and Bill Marshall, who trained in the students, said, okay, I want you to make 20 of these bowls, suples. He made the first one, and they have to be within a 16th of an inch of these dimensions and weigh up the clay. And he said, I'll make 20. And I thought, I can make 20 in 2 years. I can make 20 by lunch. And so I made them, they were awful, and he criticized them and threw them away.
Wow.
And then I made another 20, 30, 40, threw them away. The next day, throw all the 50. The next day, I get up to 100, I throw this away. I'm just throwing away thousands to get up to a certain form. It was just humbling to really grasp this form, which had been made for 30, 40, 50 years. It was just at its prime. And to be able to replicate that was very difficult. It was that discipline. It was just this disciplined, religious routine, day after day, week and month after month after month. And
That's why, I know two Leach descended potters, Clary and Jeff, and I have to say that both of them are profound in the way they can roll out the wet clay forms. But at the end of the day, their Americanism comes in, and each piece is a unique individual. And so the standard wear didn't want individuality, but I think that it's the American in us, that led you to then make it, each tea bowl is an individual. In Clary's case, each pitcher are all
and that's
individuals.
when I came back from America, trying to figure how can I make the pottery go. I modeled after Leach Pottery. And I think what I meant by that is to use them up, they get beat up and they may be broken. But I think it also meant using them up emotionally, psychologically. They just had an end point. Okay, that's gone. And then
I started realizing there was this tremendous gulf between the role of art as it traditionally has existed in human experience over thousands and 10,000 years, whatever, 150,000 years, and what art has become in America, a secret language, a field that's as discrete as physics in terms of its terminology, and it leaves people out, it leaves us out. And what did art do in the Middle Ages, for example? An altarpiece was teaching people who couldn't read the values of their culture, or later commenting on the values of their culture. So it's one of the reasons that I decided to redirect my ceramic career from what I call vessel-oriented works that were on a fence, contemporary vessels, to strictly, literally pottery things, because almost everybody in the world that's alive, whether they liked them or not, they could know what they were. And I wanted that kind of communication to be in how I spent my life. But I mean, it is something to think about, that we have this secret language. Unless you go take some contemporary art history course and read a bunch of theory and criticism, you're not really going to know how to go look at what's in the contemporary galleries and museums.
And I think what attracts me to being in the craft world is how it often relies on a team of people, and it also you create this community of people. Painters wouldn't be sitting here in the audience and asking us questions. They wouldn't have a secret conference. They wouldn't be having potlucks and talking about pots. They're not talking about technique, how to hold a brush.
Except Wayne Thiebaud. And he's the one person that came and did a painting demo at Nebraska. but yeah, you're right.
And it just connects us all.
Well, there's something, what we do draws community mind, people who like to eat and hang out together. I think our field. It's one of the best things about it.
We all love to cook.
I think going back to the passing it on, with the generation changing and technology, I think to pass it on, we also have to think about using that, because I know for us, there's about 14 of us here from a very small local art center, and so we're amateur potters. We know about Leach from our teacher, who's also here and is awesome, but we don't do it for anything other than community and being together and to play with clay, and sometimes that means not making anything, and that's fine. But we all go to YouTube. No matter our age in the center, if we want to learn something, we're not sure, or we want to see something new, we go to YouTube. So you want to pass it on. I think we're getting to a point where no matter what income you come from, there's access to computers, whether it's in school, we're talking about iPads, whether it's at the library, whether it's in your home. So I think that's the future, and that's where that shift has to happen, because right now, art is really only available for those who have the money to go outside the school and get it. And that's a huge breakdown, because sometimes the kids who need it the most and those families that need it the most aren't those kids. So I think that's the future. That needs to be shifted, where that's accessible in a way that's free and easy and can be cheap and inexpensive.
And it's great. It's a form of an amazing democratic form, the internet. And I just spent some time with the young residents at a clay center for a month and learned about all the ways they're obsessed with marketing. And what they're doing every day, instead of reading about Bernard Leach or absorbing a philosophy, they are looking at who's marketing their work really well on Etsy. And they're having Etsy shops, and they're selling work via Instagrams, and they're doing all of this stuff and online. And the problem is this, to be understood, needs to be picked up. I cannot understand this from an image online. However, I just joined an online gallery, because I feel like I can't be a Luddite. I have to do what I need to do. But it's true, you can't know this unless you know the potter's work. Buying online is a very risky thing, because there should be a joy to picking up the object. And that's what I love about Jeff's work.
And it's
so often it's joy in picking up the object.
And to me, it's that first response when you pick up a pot. That's the one that you fall in love with, that first encounter. I don't fall in love with the pot on the screen. It's that first encounter. You just pick at the feel of the clay and the weight and this, and it's turning it over. That's when it's
exploring it, and then it's part of it. You might reject it after you've done that, because it doesn't feed you the experience, the tactile experience.